Hey everybody, how we doing? I am Casey at Niners_fan man. If you don't already know, so you can follow me on socials there. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about fantasy football, and you might think, oh, we're going to talk about players in the league, and we might talk about them a little bit, but it's early on still in fantasy football seasons, in mock draft season. Obviously, football hasn't started yet, so I want to start at the very beginning. We haven't talked much fantasy football on this channel yet. This channel is going to have its own fantasy football league. You can stay tuned to find out how you might get a spot in said league. Also, right at the top of the video, I'll say check down in the video description here for the different giveaways we have going on right now. I think we have multiple that are live. As one for some NFL memorabilia, which we will be actually picking the winner for tomorrow on a combo NBA NFL Super Show, as we've come to call them. If you caught the one we did last week, it was pretty fun. It was a really good time. I had a good time sharing the stage with John. We're planning on doing that again this week, and hopefully we'll have Daps joining us. He's been on an NFL show with us before just recently in the last couple of weeks. So as we're still getting into NFL content, I thought this would be a good way to finally start getting into fantasy football, because I know y'all love fantasy football. It's very popular these days. But before we get too into strategies and which players are best and things like that, we got to talk formatting, because a lot of people just get fast and loose talking fantasy. And you guys are playing in a lot of different formats out there. I'm going to share with you guys what the standard format kind of looks like and what I prefer compared to the standard format, and exactly what format our Triple Cross Fantasy Football League will be. So again, guys, check down in the video description for the info on the giveaways we have going right now. Sorry ahead of time, I'm going to have to mention that a few times throughout this stream, because we do have people who come on in the middle and they don't know what's going on. We will be giving away an NFL swag gift card to DAP Sports at the end of the show, so stay tuned for that. And who knows, we might even give away a couple spots in the league tonight. I haven't fully decided yet. Let's just play it by ear and see how it goes. Hey, Jamie, how's it going? Jamie in the chat. I know Mike's in the chat as well. Good to have you guys here. I see Rose in the chat. How's it going, guys? Looks like we got some people coming in now. So, yeah, fantasy football is something that I have a lot of fun playing every year. I'm usually in about 5 leagues or so. Actually, if I'm being honest, it's more like 7 leagues probably in the last few years. I'm kind of an addict. I have a little bit of a problem. But I think a lot of people tend to be in like 2, maybe 3 leagues, maybe just a couple, or even just one. A lot of people like to play in just one every year. And yeah, so you might not know the finer details of all the, like, from one league to the next. And let's explore that a little bit today. I'm trying to buy a little bit of time before we get too into the thick of it, as some people are still jumping on the stream. But I can go ahead and share with you guys real quick. I'll put something up on the screen so you guys can start to follow along. So I did just create our league for – oops, wrong button there. Apologies. I did just create our league today. And I'm going to show you guys, like I said, how it starts out, how it is when it's default. You can see TCP Fantasy Football League here, just freshly created today. The only thing that it asked me before I got to this screen basically was like the name, and then just a couple of really basic things, like do I want to have a flex position, and do I want to play full PPR or no PPR or half PPR. So I clicked like more advanced settings so that we can get into this a little bit more. But for those, those are probably the most like common variants. If you don't know, PPR stands for point per reception. So for your receivers and your running backs, your tight ends in particular, you could set it on standard, which would mean if they catch a 4-yard pass, they get 0.4 points, because those 4 yards are worth 0.4, a tenth of a point for each yard. But if you play PPR, full PPR, that same play for that same player who caught a 4-yard pass would get 1.4 points, okay? Because they get 1 point for the reception and then the 0.4 for the yardage. And then if you play half PPR, which is kind of the more common variant nowadays, it's what the most sophisticated leagues have kind of moved to in general. They play half point PPR, meaning you get half a point for reception. So on that same play, you would end up with 0.9 points, half a point for the reception, and 0.4 for the yardage. Hope that all makes sense to you guys. If it doesn't, make sure to ask your questions. I will keep an eye on the chat. But that's one of the more basic those are some of the more basic rule variants in fantasy football these days. So if you've never played fantasy football and you'd like to learn a little bit more about it, stick around. Feel free to ask questions, and we can get more into whatever you want as we go through here. I have really just no agenda for this. Just wanted to talk a little fantasy. And then after a little bit, I'm going to end the show and do our regular gift card giveaway. So that should be a good time. Like I said, might even give away a spot or two into the league tonight. So this is what it looks like when you first start up a league. These are the basic scoring settings. Before I go too far down here, we're going to mostly stay in these scoring settings. We'll also look a little bit at roster positions. Real quick before I go into those scoring settings, your basic roster will look like this: 1 quarterback, 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, 1 tight end, and 1 flex position, which you could call it a flex or a WRT. But basically that means you can put either a wide receiver, a running back, or a tight end into this flex position. And that is, whichever one you prefer. If you have a backup tight end after this guy you already have in your starting lineup, well, then you could play 2 tight ends. If you have 3 good running backs, you can plug in an extra running back. 3 good receivers, same thing. You can put in an extra receiver there. Kind of just makes it fun. That's how it looks standard, plus a kicker and a team defense. We're not going to talk a ton about those today because, spoiler alert, over in the league that we will be playing, which is mostly just going to be copying, pasting another league that I run with some scoring settings that I really like, we're going to remove kicker and defense altogether. So we don't need to worry about that. Personally, when I play with defense, I prefer IDP, which means individual defensive players. That's definitely a topic for another time. We are not going to get into that. That is if you are a pure fantasy football nerd. But I think the team defense thing is a little too simple. And same thing with kicker. It's just a little too random. Not really much that's added to the game besides just a little random component. And also just it's just a weird position. So nobody's really hoping too much for a kicker to succeed compared to like their star running backs and things like that. So it feels weird when you lose based off of like a field goal. But hey, it's your journey if you like to play that way. Like I said, today I'm going to focus on what I like to do and what we're going to be doing in the Triple Cross League. So actually, let's stay on this really quick, on this roster first. And I'll touch on some things that I found to even out roster imbalances. So the problem with this, let's start with I called this the problem with fantasy football. I'm going to be talking about several problems with fantasy football today, actually. So these are your basic rosters. Like I said, I'm now going to show you what I have found that I like the most in another league that I run. So we do the same thing here. 1 quarterback, 2 running backs. That's all the same. And we actually remove the tight end position. And it's not because I don't like tight ends. It's because there's this disparity between tight ends. You got guys, you can go back to like the Gronk days. You have Gronk just completely dominating all of their tight ends. You have nowadays Travis Kelce doing pretty much the exact same thing to the league, and he's done it for the last 5 years or so. Sometimes there's another guy who can get up there with him, like a Mark Andrews type of guy who's pretty close. But then there's usually a pretty steep drop off to like 3 or 4 more guys. And depending on if you're in a 10 or 12 team league, the teams that are unlucky enough to not get one of those like top half tight ends, they basically have nobody worth rostering on their team. And they're playing some guy that they've never heard of just about at tight end, some guy who ultimately isn't going to make a big difference other than he might completely mess up your team because he might put up 0 points and you lose because of it. So we remove the tight end position, but in this particular format, we add them to receivers. We just don't distinguish between tight ends and receivers. And that might sound weird at first, but when you think about it, when it comes to fantasy football, what really is the difference? Tight ends and receivers generally don't run the football. You could say tight ends block a little bit more, but we don't even account for that in fantasy sports. So why not just put them together anyway? And the way to make tight ends actually valuable, because that would only make Travis Kelce and maybe a few other guys, like pretty valuable guys as receivers, the tight ends, I mean. What we do here is we add to this group. we add 2 wide receivers and tight ends instead of having 2 wide receivers, which if you remember, that's what it was, 2 wide receivers and 1 tight end in the other format. Now we have a combination of the 2, and you have to start 4 of them. Okay. So this is for a couple of reasons. One, because now we've grabbed tight ends. So you have more viable guys. You have the Kelseys, maybe the Kittles, the Mark Andrews, those guys. With them, there's a few more people who are viable starting in these, like, let's call them WT spots. Also, one of the things that just kind of, I think, wrong about fantasy football is in this other format, in this original format, which you're seeing again now, with 2 wide receivers and 2 running backs, this is completely unbalanced. Anybody who pays attention to football, there's way, way, way more wide receivers in the league that are viable in a fantasy way. They might not be as predictable, sure, but there's only, first of all, like workhorse running backs, the running backs that are great to roster, the guys who are great picks, like a Christian McCaffrey type or somebody like a Derrick Henry who gets a ton of carries and stuff like that. Those guys are a dying breed in the NFL. So with that factored in, and the fact that backfields are more or less like rotations now and a whole bunch of like RB by committee type of teams, there aren't enough good receivers to outweigh there aren't enough good running backs to equal how many good wide receivers there are. So why do we need to start the same amount of these things? I don't know. It's just kind of a legacy thing in fantasy sports, and I think it's something that's wrong with it. So back to my format here. And guys, I'll check your questions here in just a second. So ask any questions if you have them about it. So the WT, instead of it being a combination of a 3-man thing, you need 2 wide receivers and 1 tight end. I say you need 4 between both of them. Just go get them. Okay, perfect. So next up, we do have a flex spot, just a regular old flex spot. You can put in another wide receiver, running back, or tight end into there. So if you have a third running back who's good, you can plug him in. That's kind of how a real team operates, by the way. You have to have 2 running backs. Even if you don't play one a lot or one's way better than the other, you have to have 2. But some teams will choose to use a third one quite a bit. So that makes good sense out of that balance too. So you could have 2 or 3 running backs that you play in your starting lineup. And then the same thing with wide receivers and tight ends. When was the last time a team only had 3 between those 2 positions, like in most fantasy formats? Now we already have 4, but some teams run 5 wide sets. So now you could add in that 5th wide receiver. You can have 5 wide receivers in your starting lineup with this format. And that's not even it, because in this league, what I love to do here is, and this is my favorite thing of any fantasy league now, is the super flex position. It's made, if you do it right, it adds a balance to your league that you really can't get any other way, because it's the ultimate leveling off of all the different positional markets. And what I mean by that is this. In most fantasy leagues, there's just one quarterback that plays, right? So there's going to be one from each team. For the sake of argument, let's just say every team or every league is a 10-team league. So if every team has to have one starter, there'll be 10 quarterbacks who play, right? That's it. On a weekly basis, there's only 10. So only the top 10 quarterbacks really matter. And usually in my experience, about half the teams tend to take a backup. So you'll have another 5, maybe 6, let's say, rostered that are backups on the different fantasy teams. So you only have half the quarterbacks in the league who are rostered. And quarterbacks are going to score way more points than other positions just in general, because that's just the way fantasy football is. And that kind of makes sense when you look at it, because people say quarterback is the most important position in football, right? So why shouldn't it be the most important position in fantasy football as well? And that's not a horrible take, I guess. But the thing is, the balance is off. So if you look at most leagues, when you look at and I challenge you to do this, if you go back to your fantasy league or you go to your fantasy league, you log in and you look at last year's end of season stats, I want you to sort it by fantasy points and start reading in order who scored the most fantasy points. And all the names at the top are going to seem pretty good. You're going to have like a Patrick Mahomes. You're going to have mostly like the really great quarterbacks. I actually have some of this up already, so I can show you guys this actually. So if we would have played last season under these default rules, this is PPR, by the way. So if we played with PPR rules, which by the way, PPR is already, the intent of adding a point per reception is to give more value to the guys who receive the ball, because there's already such a huge discrepancy from the quarterbacks. The quarterbacks get way more points already. So PPR was made to try to even out the difference a little bit more. So this is even with PPR scoring. This is what it looks like if I take all offensive players, all offense from the 2022 season. How did they finish? Sorted by fantasy points here. So you can see I'll have, come on now, resort. Let's just hit that again. Maybe that'll work better. Computer's not wanting to participate. There we go. Okay, so you can see at the top of the list here, no surprise to anybody, Patrick Mahomes, then Josh Allen, then Jalen Hurts. So 3 quarterbacks in a row. Now, you might be of the philosophy that quarterback is the most important position in football, sure. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the 3 top quarterbacks should score the most points out of all players. At least that's just kind of an interesting thing to me. At 4th, we do have Austin Eckler coming in as our first non-quarterback, but then followed up immediately by Joe Burrow. So the 4 of the top 5 highest scorers in fantasy football by standard scoring, or by PPR scoring, even if it was standard, it'd be way worse. There'd be way more quarterbacks up here. Yeah, you can see that there's really no catching these guys. There's only 2 guys over 400, and they're quite a ways over 400. And then the best non-quarterback got to 378. And I don't know if you guys remember how good of a season Austin Eckler had, but the guy had 13 rushing touchdowns and 5 receiving touchdowns. Most players never sniff 18 touchdowns in a single season. So the fact that even with a season like this, with almost 1,000 rushing yards, and I guess between these two, you could say he has over 1,630 yards between rushing and receiving. So 1,600 all-purpose yards and 18 touchdowns, 127 targets. I mean, he can't get more involved in the offense, really. You can't have much better of a season from a non-quarterback position. And honestly, the quarterbacks didn't even have that great of a season. But you can see my main thesis here is that you can't catch up to quarterbacks. So let's take a look at what the chat thinks, see if you guys kind of generally agree with me so far. But my premise here is that quarterbacks are pretty much busted in fantasy. I'm going to show you how to fix that with some scoring settings and some roster adjustments. We'll keep going on that in just a second. Let's see what else we got here. Who do you got as the top fantasy wide receiver? Ooh, David. Can't leak too much about what I think about that stuff because we'll be playing against some of y'all in our football league. This is the one that we'll be looking at tonight. But I will say, I'm not too crazy compared to like general fantasy community rankings. You're going to have, in whatever order you want, you're going to have the guys like Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. Devontae Adams always sneaks up there as one of those top guys. Stephon Diggs is going to be in that conversation. I don't want to leak too many things because going down even just a little bit further, I'll have some guys who are a little bit higher for me than to the average person. But yeah, generally speaking, I mean, any of the receivers you see up here, Tyreek Hill, who knows if he's going to end up with some suspension, but any of the guys you see up here, I'm not giving any, that's no special insight. But I would probably say Justin Jefferson is my top receiver this year. But good question. And Tam Vela says, I'm in Superflex and IDP keeper leagues as well as redraft. So yeah, Tam, those are awesome. Superflex and IDP. I love both of those things. I don't know if you mean that there's that the same league has Superflex and IDP, but if you do, as long as it's balanced well, that's awesome. Those are my favorite kinds of leagues, but hard to get enough people to play in those and play, good players who will play every week and everything. So Jamie says, pick me. Jamie wants a spot in the league. We'll see. Mitch wants a spot in. We'll see it. We'll see, guys. We'll do a little bit of that later, maybe. I like what's going on in here. All right, you guys. Adam's accusing me of rigging things again. That's why we're talking formatting today. I want everybody to know what's going on so you understand it. I do have a little bit of experience with this scoring format, but as long as you understand what's going on, you can make good decisions too. So does this, by the way, the whole premise that I'll be talking about is nerfing your QBs. Nerfing is like I don't know where that term originated, but it's like nerf football. Like it's like make it softer. You don't have to play with like a real football. Same thing we're doing with quarterbacks. We're going to make them a little softer. We're going to take away some of this like crazy upside they get, where if they have a crazy season, they're clearly the number one best player. And we're just going to try to even them out with the other positions. And I actually know that I've pretty much accomplished that already with this scoring format. So let's dive back into it, everybody. So I'm going to show you how the ranks finished in my league that I run using my point system. So let's share this tab instead. So now you can see, actually, Austin Eckler, with that crazy season I just talked about, he's at the top of this. And I hope you guys can see that. I can zoom more if you'd like. Oh, and I just realized I'm not over on PlayBack. Let me go ahead and start broadcasting on PlayBack because we do want our VIPs over there to be able to watch the stream as well. If you guys want to be a VIP of ours over on PlayBack, you can join in the link in the description. That's also where we'll be doing the giveaway at the end of this stream for some NFL swag. So join me over on PlayBack. I'm making sure that our stream is up there right now. But you guys should still be looking at my last year's scoring. And you can see that Austin Eckler, with that season he had, he's actually at the top of the list. And that's not because I purposely made it to be this way where we're going to have this guy overtake all the quarterbacks. No, I've actually been dialing in this scoring for the last couple of years. And this is just what happens is the number one running back, the number one quarterback, and the number one receiver. Remember, receivers and tight ends are the same position in this league. So those are the only positions that exist. We took away kicker and defense. So there are only quarterbacks, running backs, and WTs, and then different flex positions where you can have any combination of those. So you can see that they're within 10 points of each other. The top from all the positions, the number one running back, number one quarterback, and number one WT, they're within 10 points of each other. That, to me, screams balance. Sure, there could be from year to year, there's a difference there, but that's essentially what I was after a few years ago when I did this. And I did it through a mathematical kind of thing I devised. I took the top 50 QBs, or I took the amount of guys who generally should start from in a league based off of what I did before. 10 quarterbacks normally start. Well, we might have 15 because there's a flex thing. So because there's a super flex, you can have more quarterbacks starting. So over time, I've kind of dialed this in. Hopefully we're streaming over on PlayBack now. Can you guys see on PlayBack now? Or are you guys still staring at a black screen? Somebody in PlayBack, let me know if it's working now. And I'm going to keep running here. So let's keep looking at this list. So like I said, the top three are balanced now. So what does it look like going down the list? We have Eckler, Mahomes, Jefferson, Allen, McCaffrey, Hill, Hurts, Adams, Jacobs, and Kelsey. I believe that's 10, right around there if I'm not mistaken. So we have balance here. We don't have quarterbacks just absolutely running away with it. We have three quarterbacks in the top 10. Let me make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Perfect. So we have three quarterbacks, three running backs, and 4 WTs. That kind of makes sense because there are more WTs than any other position. So they kind of, just by sheer numbers, they have that extra slot in the top 10. That's kind of coincidental. It's not always 3, 3, 4 making up the top 10. But that, to me, tells me I've dialed in this format pretty well so that it's pretty even. And let's take it another layer. So you have to have 20 running backs start, right? Because every team has 2. So let's just cut right to the chase. Let's just go to where we see the number 20th running back. Okay, so right here, Jerick McKinnon, actually, with just PPR format. I didn't do anything to the running backs. With PPR formatting, Jerick McKinnon last year was the 20th running back, season long. So we're right about at 30 with the WTs here. So this actually becomes pretty interesting because, like I said, with the super flex, and hopefully this isn't too, hopefully this is making sense to everybody. No video and playback, says Adam. Okay, let me make sure. What is not? Are you sure there's no video here? I'm seeing a video up. Yeah, okay. Yep, there is now. Okay. We're good. We're good in playback. Okay. So, guys, so to the point of balance. So you have to remember there are 2 starting running backs on every team. There's 4 WTs, but then there's also a flex position. So after the top 40 here and the top 20 here, we need another 10 that are accounted for. So let's kind of look at what that would be. We're at we're at. Oh, these are the. Oh, here we go. This is the position rank. I was looking at the wrong position rank. This is ECR, by the way. You guys can't see my little cursor. Here we go. I don't want to look at these numbers over here. This is ECR. This is like estimated for the season upcoming from Fantasy Pros. So not what I actually meant to look at. What we want to look at is here on positional rankings. This is actually based off of the fantasy points they had last year. So this is actually the column we're looking at, not to be confused with the other one. So to get to the 20th ranked running back, it is Jerick McKinnon. And then we're going to need 40 WTs, right? So where do we land when we go to 40 WTs? And I know you might be thinking, Casey, you're scrolling way past where the top 20 running backs are. But that's okay. Just hold on. Allen Lazard finished as the 40th WT. So those guys, if everybody drafted perfectly and started all the right guys, all those guys would already be started before we even get the flex conversation going. Okay, so now we start looking at the flex conversation. So how many running backs are there already above this that could already have filled flex spots? Well, right here we see 27. So there's 7 at this point, and we have a 41 and 42 WT, and then a 43 WT. So right here, this is actually really cool. 27 and 43 equal out right there together so that we hit a cool 70, which is all the spots. If they were perfectly drafted, everybody took the right guy, like they could have known what the future was going to be. Right here at this 170 point mark is where you would say like, oh, anybody above that is flex worthy or starter worthy in my lineup. Anybody below that really wasn't quite there. But we do have that one extra spot of super flex, right? So like I said, we can draw a line at 170, whether it's a running back or a receiver or a tight end, they're flex worthy above this line. There's 27 running backs who qualify there and 43 wide receiver / tight ends who qualify there. Not to mention all the starters above them. Now we also have the super flex position. And this is cool because this gets quarterbacks back in the mix. So you can see right here, we have the 19th quarterback, Marcus Mariota. So Mariota is the 19th best quarterback. He would also technically, if everybody drafted perfectly, barely be a starter because we'd have all of these guys, the 27 top running backs and 43 top receiver and tight ends, all filled up already, including with the flex positions. And now we got to fill 10 more to get to a super flex. So who does that end up being, basically? Well, there's one more running back. We got, 9 QBs because we only needed 10 from before. So if everybody drafted perfectly again, but of course people are going to have backups, so it doesn't work out that way. But just looking at kind of a general spread of who would be starting, you see that you could afford one more running back with 9 more QBs, and you could draw that line right here. So it takes all the different markets between the different positions, and it just equalizes them all out to a standard number, basically. So you aren't looking at quarterbacks compared to each other saying, who do I want to be my starter? You're looking at quarterbacks more in a way of, are they even viable to play? So a guy like Marcus Mariota, sure, you could say he is, or he was last season, but it was by a razor thin margin, and he's by no means a guy you really want there. He was if everything went perfect, he'd be like the last guy to fill a super flex spot. So even though I'm nerfing QBs down, I'm adding more opportunities for you to start QBs, and it's kind of up to you to decide whether that makes QB more of an important position or a less important position. I'll tell you from experience playing in this league, I don't know. It's very impossible to tell. I basically, when I came out trying to make this format, I tried to confuse myself. I said, what are the major hacks in fantasy and how can we remove them? Just make a new league where people can just draft the people they want and that they believe in and just start them. And through a lot of experimentation, I kind of figured out that with some extra flex positions, you kind of get that availability you want. So does anybody have questions about this kind of stuff, about this, whether it's about what a super flex position is, where you can start a quarterback, running back, wide receiver, or tight end, or any other questions about scoring, which I guess I didn't go into the scoring very much yet, but let's actually do that. Let's do that now. Hopefully you guys, if you have any questions about roster positions, I guess, because we already covered that here, what this looks like. Oops, you guys, I have to actually hit this button or you guys don't see what I'm seeing. So this is what I do in my league. And then this is what it looks like by default. So those are the two differences. We take this and we're going to turn it into this. and make it so that you can start more than one quarterback. You can start up to 2 quarterbacks, but you can start up to 6 receivers technically, or you can start up to 4 running backs technically. A lot of different combinations you can make using the different guys you draft. And just to make it a little more fun, in this league, I don't have a particularly deep bench. So you can't just, you can't have a whole bunch of guys stacked up behind you. Like you can't take 7 quarterbacks or something like that and just see what happens and be like, sucks for everybody else. I don't have all the or you don't get a quarterback. You only have 5 bench spots. That's actually a pretty shallow bench with how many starters there are in this lineup. I believe there's 9, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yep. So 9 starters, only 5 bench spots. But you only have to cover 3 different types of positions. So it's pretty realistic to do. You just can't stash people for a whole season very well, because when injuries kind of pile up and other things in bye weeks, you're going to need those bench spots. So like I said, I've played this. It works pretty well. Takes maybe a little bit of getting used to, but that's why I want to dive into this stuff as much as possible before we get this league going. So let's check it out. Let's check out the actual difference in scoring now, because that's just roster positions. Pretty important, but arguably you could say that scoring is even more important. So again, we'll take a look at the basic scoring first, so you guys can all see this now. So this is actually not as bad as it could get. A lot of leagues, this very first stat we're going to look at, passing touchdowns. Standard I'm on Yahoo, by the way, here. So standard on Yahoo, when you first make a league, they get 4 points per passing touchdown. Let's skip over really quick to other touchdowns. Rushing touchdowns are worth 6. Receiving touchdowns are worth 6. If you kick return touchdown, it's worth 6. If you fumble return touchdown, it's worth 6. So how much are touchdowns worth? 6. Except for when a quarterback throws one, it's worth 4. And that makes sense because quarterbacks throw way more touchdowns. This is one of those things that even standard format in Yahoo, they've realized, like, okay, we used to have it at 6 for quarterbacks throwing touchdowns, but it just makes quarterbacks way too important. They score all the points. You can win a whole week just by having your quarterback do really well, even if all your other guys don't do good at all. So they've already attempted to try to fix this issue a little bit. I've taken it one step further, and I think one step better. So let's look. By the way, this was not the standard way very long ago. It was 6. So good on fantasy community for moving to 4 and passing touchdowns. But like I said, it's not quite enough. So let's look at mine here. Let's compare. I'll try to get a shot to stay exactly the same. And this is going to look like quite a bit of difference. You can see that there's a -1 in interceptions. So you get 4 points if you throw a touchdown, but -1 if you throw an interception. To me, that just, if you just heard about this game for the first time of fantasy football, that seems pretty forgiving to quarterbacks. It sounds like they're going to score a lot of touchdowns. We don't live in the days where quarterbacks have like a 1-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio anymore, especially nobody you would be playing in fantasy football. So why are we giving them why are we giving them 4 and taking away only 1? Like, seems to me the penalty should be steeper, and I've figured that out as well. So guys, what I do is I take away 2 points, so double that damage, double the negative for throwing an interception. But I also have some other stuff here that's pretty cool wrinkle. So just as a side-by-side, the standard on passing yards, this bottom one here, standard is 25 yards equals 1 point. And that makes a good amount of sense too. I don't hate that. It makes sense mathematically, right? Because you're saying like, oh, okay, 25 yards. So for 100 yards, he'll get 4 points. Okay, well, that makes it easy to do math that way. But again, that's just like picking a number that just seems like, oh, close enough. And we just leave it there forever because it's close enough. But it's not the actual like right number. It's contributing to quarterbacks getting too many points for no real reason. I don't want it to just, that's a nice round number. Why not? What I've done here is I go with 30 yards for 1 point, based off the premise that a 300-yard passing game for a quarterback is essentially the same as like a running back or a receiver getting 100 yards. It's not perfectly the same, but I would say it's closer than a quarterback getting 250 yards passing. I mean, that happens a lot. And running backs and receivers don't get 100 yards a lot. So again, we're giving the yardage bonus just to quarterbacks for no reason. This kind of takes that away, does a pretty good job. But again, we're still not quite there yet. Another thing that generally kind of I don't understand why we don't account for this. You can see in standard scoring, there's no penalty for sacks. And I get it. Trust me. Like you could make your argument. You could say sacks aren't really a quarterback stat. It's not the quarterback's fault. Joe Burrow comes to mind. He's one of the top young quarterbacks in the league, and he gets sacked all the time, but it's not his fault. His O-line is terrible. So why should we blame him if the O-line can't protect him at all? Well, I mean, by that same token, by that same principle, when Joe Burrow throws a screen pass to Jamar Jamar Chase, and he takes it to the house for 70 yards, but Burrow only threw it behind the line of scrimmage. Well, why should we give Burrow all those yards in the touchdown if he houses it from his own 20, right? Like that, he didn't do anything there either. So same principle. It's kind of team ball, and that's exactly what you're not drafting quarterbacks when you have this going on, this -1 for sacks. You're not just drafting the quarterback based off of arm talent and what his upside could be and how good his receivers are. You're looking at the offense a little bit more going, oh, yeah, does he have some protection too? Because, yeah, I mean, if he gets sacked 4 or 5 times a game on average, that's going to hurt his performances. I mean, a good quarterback is still going to do fine, but, I'm adding in potentially another -4, -5 on top of the other stingy tweaks we've done. So those are the main differences. And then a new rule change that I've added this year. So I haven't actually played by these rules we'll be starting this new league with exactly, because I actually have had some complaints. People saying from my league, quarterbacks don't score enough. And that's because they're used to leagues where they score way too much, in my opinion. I already showed you how they're actually pretty balanced to the other positions now. But I have added in one thing, and this is already accounted for in that ranking the rankings that I was showing you. So I have added in these completion and incompletion bonuses and negative bonuses, whatever that would be. Basically, it's tiny. It's not going to do a lot, but it will be a little bit more of a bump to the types of quarterbacks who get a raw end of the deal. Because one thing that is broken in fantasy outside of anything I can fix is a rushing quarterback is a cheat code. Again, no matter whether you have this at 25 yards per 1 point or 30 yards per 1 point, quarterbacks don't get the same amount of yardage for passing the ball as runners of the ball get, where they get 10 yards is all it takes to get a point. So if Lamar Jackson or another running quarterback who runs all the time, if he runs for 100 yards, that's already 10 points for him when it would take 300 yards to do that otherwise. So a little bit of a cheat code there. Luckily, not too many guys in the league are masters of both, scrambling and rushing for yardage and being some field general, can make every throw on the field type of guy. There's not too many guys who can do stuff like that. But this completion, incompletion thing is meant to help out the guys who are a little bit more pocket passer-ish. So the basic thing that's going on here is you'll get 0.1 points when you complete a pass, and we'll remove 0.1 points when you have an incompleted pass. So really quickly, all you need to think about is what is the guy's completion percentage? We're trying to give a net positive to guys who are efficient passers. So if you have a guy who runs for 100 yards like a Lamar Jackson, but he's not very efficient, if he only completes 50% of his passes, well, then this is all going to be lost in the wash. He's not going to get any bonus out of this stuff at all. He's going to go up as much as he goes down if he completes 50% of his passes. But if you get a guy who completes 70% of his passes, he's going to end up with a couple more points for the week than he would otherwise without this going on. So I did kind of concede a little bit where I got some feedback from people playing. They wanted quarterbacks to get a few more points. And this is specifically to help out those guys who already get the raw end of the deal. So we'll see how that goes. I'm always trying to make things a little bit better in scoring, but I think we've really dialed in and we found a sweet spot. Just to finish everything out here, everything else is standard PPR, which is an oxymoron. Standard is one thing, PPR is another. So PPR is actually what the rest of this is. 6 point per touchdown of any kind. Excuse me. 6 point touchdowns, whether it's rushing or receiving or kick or punt return, even though the new rules in the NFL make it so that there won't be much returning going on at all. That's another topic for another day. And 10 yards equals 1 point, whether that's for rushing or receiving. That's totally normal. We also have 1 point per reception, just like we talked about, full point PPR. I'm not really on the half point trend, which is, again, that's kind of the most popular thing now. Again, it doesn't do enough to help out the running backs, receivers, tight ends, catch up to quarterbacks. So I'm out on that in general. And I also don't generally do these like 40-yard bonuses either. So just keep it nice and simple. But the quarterback thing you do have to get kind of used to, because in my opinion, you should be trying to nerf quarterbacks down and make the positions a little bit more balanced. This is a little bit different. Kick return, punt return, touchdowns are worth 6. Most leagues, let's flip over to the other thing real quick. This has always been weird to me. They used to have this, and then through kind of like an overcorrection early on in the years of fantasy football, I think we overreacted. We used to have, so we've always had return touchdowns count as 6, and I'm back on the standard scoring, by the way, the regular, we just started up the league scoring. There's no points for return yards. You've all probably only played in leagues like this before, and I get it. It's weird of me to add back in return yards. It used to be in the game probably 10, 15 years ago. I've added them back in. The problem is we used to have them at like the same as receiving and rushing yards. 10 yards equals 1 point. I make it the same as the passing yards. So you need 3 times as many to even make to even get the same amount. So if a guy has a 30-yard return, that's a big return in the NFL. It's worth 1 point. So we can calm down on that being something that breaks the game. And usually return men don't have big roles in an offense. So all this does is for those like really late spots, the really low spots on your roster where you just need a starter, where it's like a super flex spot and you don't have a second quarterback that you can play, or you already have 5 receivers in the other spots and you need a 6th receiver to plug in because you don't have another running back either. Well, a return guy is able to add in, like if he gets 45 yards returning on the game, that's an extra 1.5 points. And maybe that plus like his other like couple catches on the offense. And if a couple of those, he gets some good yards after the catch, maybe he's a viable fantasy guy on a weekly basis, or like for a week. I mean, if he has a good game or if he breaks a touchdown off on a return or something like that. So it's nothing that's crushed the game at all. Only helps the back end of rosters, really. And then everything else is pretty much the same. The only other tiny thing that I change is I think it's kind of weird that we do. Again, this is the standard one I'm looking at here. For fumbles lost, they normally do -2. By the way, 2-point conversions are 2. I didn't say that out loud. And like we said, all touchdowns are 6s. But they do fumbles lost are 2, and I don't really agree with that. I think that this is a little bit better. Again, you could say like basically it's the same thing, but this just makes more sense to me. When you lose the fumble, it's -1, and if the other team recovers it, meaning fumble lost, like your team doesn't get it back, that's when you lose another one. So -1 for fumbling, minus another one if you don't get it back. Because sometimes if a player drops the ball and then he picks it right back up, like, yeah, sure, he fumbled, okay, but he got it back and it doesn't hurt the team. So let's not double ding that guy for no reason. So that's kind of how I see it. There's no field goal stuff in here because, again, we took off kickers. That's the entirety of the scoring that we have here. For anybody who does get into the league, here's something that I highly, highly recommend you do. You want to – this is what I do with any league I join, by the way, because there's so many different leagues with custom scoring. Here's what I highly recommend you do with any league that you first join. Go to – if you're on Yahoo, on the other platforms, you can do something like this anyway. But you go to all players, all offense, look at last season like I just showed you, hit filter, and see this. Like, when I see this, immediately I go, oh, okay. Like, this is not just a league where quarterbacks reign supreme. Running backs are going to matter a little bit here. Okay, cool. I can even take this, and there's lots of options usually on these kinds of things, no matter what platform you're on. But I can take this and go remaining projected games. So remaining games projected, that means for this season coming up. This is a pretty cool view too, because of course it's not necessarily right, but this is what Yahoo thinks it'll be. So for anybody who will eventually be in this league, this is the scoring that we'll be using. I mean, this is what it looks like. So again, if you think that I'm stacking the deck in my favor, all you need to be doing is looking at this. If you end up in our fantasy league, probably even point people back to this video if they ask questions. You can see that this is what Yahoo thinks based off their projections of how they think the season's going to play out. This is who they think will score the most points. Does that mean that's who's most valuable? Not necessarily, because you can plug different guys in at different positions. Jamar Chase, for example, he could fill one of 6 spots on your starting lineup. Pat Mahomes can only fill 2, but how you weigh those positions is part of the strategy of the game. But what definitely is the case is that these are more jumbled up than in a standard league where you just see quarterback all at the top. There's going to be a lot of variance between positions. And what is great about that is once everybody's kind of taken their starters and maybe grabbed a backup here and there and stuff like that, it becomes really fun in how people are filling out those bottom spots on the roster, the bottom spots of their lineup. I mean, their starting lineup with all those flex positions going on. And also the rest of the roster too, like who you choose to bench for the year. It being a shallow bench, if you do carry somebody as just a pure backup who isn't just somebody who would normally start on your team who is hurt, or who's like a backup of a position like a quarterback, it's more common to have a backup because if your one quarterback is hurt, you kind of need another one. If you choose to roster somebody like that, then it's tough. Like you only have so many spots. You really feel that in a league like this. So that is the experience that you will have if you end up playing in our Triple Cross football, fantasy football league. If you guys have any questions, I'll look through and make sure I've answered some of these. I'm not looking at PlayBack right now, but for anybody who's still around, make sure you stick around. I'll actually head over to PlayBack in just a minute, just after I make sure nobody has any questions. And then we'll kind of do our post-show giveaways and things like that. I want to take this time to just say, guys, if you haven't already, we do have multiple giveaways going on. I said it at the top of the show, but we have an NFL Memorabilia giveaway going on right now. The winner of that giveaway will be, as far as I know, the winner of that will be drawn tomorrow on the NBA NFL combo show we're doing. That show will be bigger than this for sure. We also have a Cornhole bags giveaway going on right now. You can enter to win $100 worth of Cornhole bags. Pretty cool prize. We've been doing some Cornhole content on this channel. That's been going pretty well. We're going to continue to do that. Should have some Cornhole for you this weekend, looking at Saturday afternoon. The exact time, TBD. Could even get bumped to a different day, but right now that's what I'm eyeing. Hopefully I have a couple we should have a decent spread of talent. And that one, you guys should finally see some better throwers than myself and Megan. Although we'll be in the mix too. It should be a fun time. That's my plug for the giveaways. Also, there is a PlayBack link in the video description as well. That's where we're all going to be headed in about 5 minutes. And I'm going to give away a gift card to somebody in the chat. So make sure you join me over on PlayBack. Doesn't look like there's a ton of questions in YouTube. So I guess I could just head over to PlayBack right now, which is what I believe I will do. I see some people over there already. We actually have more people over on PlayBack than we do on YouTube now. So if you are listening on YouTube, this is your last call. Join us over on PlayBack, whether you have questions about fantasy football, or you want to try to win a spot in the fantasy football league, or if you just want to win the NFL memorabilia gift card, you can do that too. Join me over in PlayBack. Use the link in the description. YouTube, this is going to do it for you guys. You don't get to see the giveaway unless you join us over on PlayBack. Them's the breaks. Sorry to say it. Hopefully you learned something about fantasy football formats today. It was a whole lot of information, probably too much all at once, but just for all the Adams out there, I got to put it out there so you guys all have it. Same as me. And I'll try to make some more fantasy football resources available as we get closer to what most people consider fantasy football draft season. I love fantasy football. I can't wait to talk more about it. I don't want to give away my personal rankings all that much, but we can talk generally about it for sure. We're definitely going to. Thank you for joining me on the Triple Cross Podcast channel. Make sure that you subscribe to our channel. Hit the like on this video. Would really appreciate that if you would. And hit the bell icon so you get live notifications for our live recordings of our full-length podcast episodes like tomorrow's, where John and I will be having Daps join us for an NBA/NFL combo show. You won't want to miss it. We'll be giving away all kinds of stuff there. So until next time, guys, I'll see you And let's all head over to PlayBack and give away some stuff. So join me in PlayBack. This is your last call. Links in the description of this video. I'll see you on PlayBack.